Sunlight streamed into the elite motor showroom, casting a golden glow across the gleaming bodies of luxury vehicles. It was a perfect afternoon, and the showroom looked every bit the part of an exclusive haven for the wealthy. The air was crisp with the scent of fresh leather and polished metal, as sleek sports cars stood proudly on their pedestals like works of art. Among them, one vehicle seemed to capture the light more than the others' silver Aston Martin. Its lines were flawless, a perfect marriage of elegance and power. Victoria, a modestly dressed black woman, stood before it. The world outside the showroom was a bustle of everyday life, but inside, the aura was one of unattainable luxury, a world that didn't seem made for someone like her. As Victoria approached the car, she admired its pristine finish, her fingers gently brushing the surface as she took in the details. She was no stranger to luxury. She had worked hard for everything she had, but there was something about the Aston Martin that caught her breath. Blake, the owner of the dealership, barely noticed her. His attention was more focused on his colleague, a well-dressed man in a tailored suit, and their conversation was punctuated with laughter and insider jokes. They didn't see her as a serious beer after all. What could a woman in modest clothes, with the aura of someone more accustomed to public transit than private jets, possibly know about such a car? Victoria cleared her throat gently. "Excuse me, sir, could you tell me more about the Aston Martin?" Blake barely spared her a glance, and when he did, his eyes betrayed a dismissive glance. His lips curled into a thin smile, one that oozed superiority. "Maybe you should check out our used car lot across town," he said, his tone dripping with contempt, as if he were extending a favor to someone who didn't belong in such an elite space. Victoria's heart sank. She felt the sting of his words, but she knew better than to let it show. She was accustomed to the subtle weight of racism, the little microaggressions people threw her way. Yet, she refused to be anything less than dignified in response. Without saying another word, she turned and walked out, her head held high. But what Blake didn't know was that Victoria wasn't about to walk away defeated. She had a plan. An hour later, the doors to the showroom opened once more, and Victoria returned this time, not alone. By her side was her son, a young man with a commanding presence, dressed in a tailored suit that fit him perfectly. As he entered, a few heads turned, including Blake's. The young man was tall, handsome, and had a magnetic aura of confidence that immediately stood out in the showroom full of high society clientele. But it wasn't just his appearance that made Blake's heart skip a beat, it was his name. Blake's eyes widened as he recognized the son. His face went pale. The young man standing before him was none other than Malik Rivers, renowned philanthropist, tech mogul, and one of the wealthiest investors in the country. A name that was known not only in business circles, but also in high-end luxury car brands, including Aston Martin. His net worth was in the billions, and he had a reputation for being fiercely loyal to those who respected him, and equally unforgiving to those who didn't. Malik was also a silent partner in a few exclusive ventures that Blake himself had tried to get into over the years. So when Blake connected the dots, his initial smug confidence evaporated into sheer panic. This wasn't just any woman with a passing interest in luxury cars. This was Malik Rivers' mother, and he had just insulted her. The blood drained from Blake's face. His colleague noticed the change in his expression and followed his gaze. Blake's hand trembled as he wiped sweat from his brow, his mind racing to formulate an apology. But the damage was done. Malik stepped forward, his calm demeanor hiding the fire that burned within. He looked Blake up and down, taking in the nervous owner of the showroom with a sense of quiet disdain. Without a word, Malik turned to his mother. "Mom, you look amazing," he said, a smile that radiated pride lighting up his face. "I told you we'd find the perfect car." Victoria smiled softly, her pride in her son evident. "We'll see about that, won't we?" she replied, her voice serene but firm. Blake, struggling to regain his composure, cleared his throat. I'm so sorry for the misunderstanding earlier," he stammered. Please, let me show you everything the showroom has to offer. I wasn't aware. You didn't recognize her. Malik interrupted coolly, his gaze unwavering. Let me make it clear for you. My mother doesn't need to be recognized to be treated with respect. You've insulted the wrong person today, Blake. Blake swallowed hard. I've made a mistake. I truly didn't know, he said, his voice lacking the same arrogance it had before. The air was thick with tension. But Victoria, ever poised, waved him off. It's all right. Sometimes people show their true colors, and that tells you everything you need to know. We don't hold grudges, do we, Malik? Malik shot a glance at his mother, a small nod confirming her words, no grudges. But I do expect proper treatment in the future, he said, his tone hardening just slightly. And not just from you, Blake, but from everyone who doesn't know how to treat people with dignity. Blake nodded hurriedly, his usual sense of superiority now buried under a mountain of embarrassment. He had just made an enemy of someone who could destroy his business with a single call. And more importantly, he had disrespected the wrong family. Victoria turned her attention back to the Aston Martin, her hand once more gliding over the car's surface. The smoothness of its finish matched the calm grace she carried. Malik, watching his mother, couldn't help but feel a swell of admiration. She had taught him all his life how to stand strong, how to rise above every obstacle. And this moment, despite Blake's crumbling attempt at redemption, was a reminder of just how much power a single, quiet act of dignity could wield. Blake watched helplessly as they walked away from the showroom, Malik's arm around his mother's shoulders. He knew his apology had meant nothing. They weren't buying anything today. They weren't going to give him a second chance. And worst of all, they had seen him for exactly what he was, a man who thought his wealth and privilege gave him the right to look down on others, a man who underestimated the strength of people like Victoria. As the door to the showroom closed behind them, Blake let out a shaky breath. The day had been a lesson, but it was one that he would not soon forget. Because sometimes, the people you think you can walk all over are the very ones who own the world. Blake stood frozen for a moment, staring at the door through which Victoria and Malik had just exited. His mind was racing, processing what had just transpired. The showroom, once filled with the glimmer of expensive cars and elite clientele, now seemed to suffocate him. The weight of his mistake hung in the air like an invisible storm cloud. He could feel the eyes of his employees on him, but none of them dared speak. There was nothing to say. The damage was done. Malik Rivers wasn't just any wealthy businessman. He was a mogul with the kind of influence that could shift entire industries with a single decision. Blake had just alienated someone whose connections stretched across the world, a man whose social circle included world leaders, celebrities, and other billionaires. And Victoria, Malik's mother, was no ordinary woman either. Blake had only begun to understand the gravity of his mistake. He walked back to his desk, his legs heavy, his mind clouded with a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and regret. The phone on his desk rang, breaking the silence. Hesitantly, he picked it up. Blake? It's Sandra from the executive board, came the voice on the other end. We need to discuss the new inventory shipment. Are we still on track for next week's meeting with? Blake cut her off abruptly. Sandra, I need you to do something for me. I need you to find out everything you can about Malik Rivers. His mother was just in here, and, well, I need to know everything. There was a pause on the line. Sandra, sensing the tension in his voice, hesitated before responding. Malik Rivers, the tech mogul and philanthropist? Is this about the same family that owns the Rivers Foundation? Blake's pulse quickened. Yes, that's the one. Get me everything on them, and do it fast. We've got a problem. Sandra's voice was now laced with concern. What kind of problem? Blake gripped the phone tighter. A big one. I made a huge mistake. I need to fix this now. Meanwhile, Victoria and Malik had left the dealership and were heading to the car that Malik had sent to pick them up. They didn't speak immediately as they climbed into the back seat. The drive was a quiet one, but there was a sense of satisfaction in the air. Victoria had always taught Malik the importance of holding oneself with grace and dignity, even when others chose to demean or underestimate you. She had risen above the harsh realities of the world, building her own path to success, all while shielding her son from the weight of prejudice. The encounter at the dealership had been a stark reminder of how far some people would go to hold onto their power and privilege. But Malik, ever the strategist, knew there was no need for a public confrontation. He had learned long ago that the most effective battles were often the ones fought quietly, behind closed doors. "Mom," Malik said, breaking the silence. "You handled that better than I would have. Honestly, I was about to go in there and give him a piece of my mind. But you." Victoria smiled, her eyes glimmering with the wisdom only years of experience could bring. "No need for that, Malik. You've always been the more outspoken one, and I admire that. But sometimes showing restraint is more powerful than speaking out. Besides, that man's arrogance will catch up with him. It always does." Malik nodded thoughtfully. "You're right, it's just. He didn't even recognize you. It's like he thought you didn't belong in there, like you were out of place. And it stings, doesn't it?" Victoria's face softened, her expression reflecting both strength and quiet resolve. "It's not about me, darling. It's about the assumptions people make, and the lack of respect they give to others simply because they don't look the way they expect. It's not personal, it's systemic. But we can change that, one encounter at a time." Malik let out a quiet breath, "And I'm going to make sure Blake understands that. He can't get away with treating people like that, especially not you. I don't care how much money he's got. If we're going to make a difference, it has to start with people like him recognizing their own privilege." Victoria glanced at him, her expression one of pride mixed with concern. "I know you want to make an impact, Malik, but don't forget the importance of choosing your battles. There's no point in wasting energy on someone who doesn't even deserve it." "I won't," Malik promised, "but that doesn't mean I'll let him off the hook. He's going to learn what it means to treat everyone with dignity. And if I have to go through every connection I've got to make sure that happens, then that's exactly what I'll do." Back at the dealership, Blake sat hunched over his desk, the weight of his panic now mounting. Sandra had already started pulling up everything she could find about Malik and his family. Blake's hands shook as he skimmed through the information on his laptop. The Rivers family had more than just money, they had power. They had influence that spanned across continents, and Malik Rivers himself? He had a reputation for being cold and calculating when crossed. Blake knew that if he didn't find a way to fix this, his business, his reputation, everything could be destroyed. Blake's phone buzzed. It was a message from Sandra. "I've got his contact info. Should I reach out to him?" Blake stared at the message for a long moment before typing a response. "No, but get me a meeting with him. A personal one. I need to apologize. It's my only shot." Sandra replied almost immediately. "Understood. I'll make it happen." Blake sighed and leaned back in his chair. It wasn't going to be easy, but he knew he had no choice. If he couldn't salvage this, the fallout could be catastrophic. He'd underestimated Victoria, and in doing so, he had angered one of the most powerful figures in the country. And now, he would have to pay the price. The following day, Blake found himself standing at the entrance to a high-end restaurant, awaiting Malik and Victoria's arrival. The opulent interior seemed to mock his nerves, the fine china and crystal glasses a stark contrast to the growing knot in his stomach. He had rehearsed his apology 1,000 times, but now, as he saw Malik approaching with Victoria by his side, all of his bravado melted away. Malik's gaze was cool and measured as he approached. He didn't look angry, but there was a quiet intensity in his demeanor that sent a chill down Blake's spine. Victoria, however, was the one who spoke first. "Blake, we're here to give you a chance. A chance to make things right, so I'm going to let you do that. But remember, words are just that, words. It's your actions that will speak louder than anything you can say." Blake swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I understand," he said, voice shaky. "And I'm truly sorry for everything. I misjudged you both, and I will do whatever it takes to make it right. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to show you I can be better." Victoria nodded, her eyes steady. "Actions, Blake. That's all that matters now." And just like that, the ball was in his court.